Thank you. Good morning.
Chair, thank you. Mr. Tully, do you have your statements
Yes,
still
sir.
open? In paragraph 73, which is on page 17, you talk about the culture of abuse at Brook House. And do you remember you told us yesterday that it was among a significant minority of officers and I think you said managers, but if you didn't, you certainly say that in your witness statement.
Yes, sir.
And you say the majority of DCOs weren't abusive. Many of them were hard-working, decent people, trying to do their best in a bleak, poorly staffed, highly charged and toxic environment. However, officers who were deemed too empathetic, helpful or kind to detainees were often marginalised, criticised or mocked, and you told us about that yesterday. But then you say this, for example, I understood a female DCO was bullied and intimidated after she raised concerns to a senior manager. That was what, a colleague of yours?
Yes, sir.
A DCO?
Yes, sir.
And what period was that? When are you referring to?
This was when I was in correspondence with the BBC at this point, but I wasn't secretly filming for them.
So that was sometime after, as we'll come to, January 2016.
Yes, sometimes.
And before the 24th of April 2017.
Yes, sir.
Somewhere in that
before
period.
March 2017.
Right. I'd like you to look at a video diary that you made well afterwards on the 9th of June, I think it was, 2017. And we'll put up on screen, please, if we can, TRN 000065. TRN 000065. Chair, for you, it should be your section B 99. At page 5. And if I've got it right, this is a video diary you made on the 9th of June of 2017. And you see there was a question, and perhaps this is a time we'll come back to one or two of these a little later. But a video diary, when we come to the filming that you did and the processes you underwent, was something that you would do at the end of a shift where you'd been filming, and you'd go off with the producers and you would really just be debriefed about what had happened on that day, or perhaps further thoughts about things which had happened perhaps the day or two before.
Yes, sir.
But principally this would be you debriefing or having a debrief with the producers about what had gone on and explaining what you had filmed.
Yes, sir.
And other notable events.
Yes, sir.
On this particular day, the male speaker, presumably somebody from the BBC, asked you, so why did you come to the BBC? And you say, on my initial training course, I became quite close with this lady, and we both started at the same time, both new officers, and she realised soon after starting that there were some serious problems. She complained, she took a stand, and as a result she was marginalised, she was called a grass, she was pushed out, she was bullied, and she ended up leaving shortly afterwards. I knew that if I did the same as her, then the exact same thing was going to happen to me, so I looked at different means by blowing the whistle and contacted the BBC. Now, you'll remember yesterday one of the questions I asked you is why you didn't leave after that first year, and why, going back a little in time, you became a DCO, and so on and so forth. Part of that, what you told us yesterday, is encapsulated in that passage, but the reason I'm directing your attention to this passage in particular is to ask you whether the woman that you mentioned there, the one who was marginalised, called a grass, because she complained and took a stand, is the same woman that you mentioned in paragraph 73 of your inquiry witness statement.
Yes, sir.
It is. Tell us then a little just about the complaints that she made, from what you knew and understood about it, to whom she went, and what happened to her.
Well, I think the first thing I should say is that you'll see here that I'm talking about soon after we started. She had serious concerns about Brook House, because we became quite close on the initial training course.
So we're talking about DCO, not ACO.
I think this was when I was actually training to be an ACO, but I was on the first 2 weeks of her 6-week training course to become a DCO.
Just pause there. Does that mean that when you were training to be an ACO, you would be mixed with people who'd applied to become DCOs for part of the training as well?
Yeah, your 2 weeks of training to be an ACO would be the first 2 weeks of a 6-week course for the DCOs.
Right, thank you.
So we became quite close on this course. We sat next to each other most days. And when she was a DCO, she would talk to me about her concerns for the welfare of detainees and her concerns about staff. But it was much later that she raised concerns. I was in touch with the BBC at this point.
Right, okay, so just pause there, please. Fix the month for us, month and year.
Well, it was in 2016. I made a diary entry, I believe, of this. I can't remember the exact date.
Well, we have a number of your diaries. We certainly have diaries between, we're looking at 2016, aren't we?
Yes.
So we've got diaries of yours, and do you mean your noted diaries, your contemporaneous diaries?
It could be 2016, could be early 2017, any time between the point at which I blew the whistle to the BBC and the time that I actually became employed by them, which was a period of about 14 months.
All right, well, perhaps we can look, as I say, we have several of them, some in 2016 and the larger proportion of them for 2017, but carry on, we'll see if we can find a note or somebody can find that note.
She complained that DCM Graham Pennell was stealing cash that had been sent in to detainees. She said she had first-hand knowledge of this. She said that she raised her concerns to management. She was taken off DCO duties, placed onto the menial tasks that an ACO was placed upon.
Yeah.
To her concerns, they weren't taken seriously. There appeared to me and to her to be no repercussions for Pennell, who she believed was stealing money from detainees, cash that was sent into them by loved ones, for them to either use in the detainee shop or to take upon discharge from the centre as cash.
And so what happened to her as a result of her complaint? In other words, how was she treated?
Well, she was, as I say, she was taken away from her roles as a DCO. She was.
When you say taken away from her roles as a DCO?
She was given ACO jobs, the menial tasks that I described yesterday, buzzing people through doors, unlocking.
But who made that decision?
I don't know who made the decision. I wasn't privy to to those kind of details. But I saw, here I saw an officer who complained about wrongdoing, which directly affected detainees, and rather than the manager in question facing disciplinary action, she was punished.
Yeah.
She was taken away from her duties.
Yeah.
And she was marginalised and pushed aside, and people called her a grass behind her back, and I was never prepared to have that happen to me, so I was never going to follow in her footsteps in terms of complaining internally.
Now this was the same man, the manager that you spoke about yesterday. Do you remember?
Yes, DCM
The one who
Pennell.
called detainees cunts.
And ordered the use of force on the
on the American
detainee
man.
unnecessarily, yes.
Yeah. We know because it's been confirmed overnight. His surname is Purnell. It's not your fault. You knew him as Pannell or Pennell. Parnell. It's P-U-R-N-E-L-L. Did you know that in April 2018, so after the Panorama programme and long after you had gone, almost but not quite a year afterwards, he was dismissed for gross misconduct because of his inappropriate conduct towards colleagues. So nothing to do with stealing, but all to do with inappropriate, suggestive comments and behaviour towards female members of staff. Did you know any of that? Did you see any of that while you were there?
I didn't see any. I didn't see him behave inappropriately towards female members of staff. He had a reputation for it, but I'd never seen any evidence of it.
Yeah. Do you remember yesterday you were telling us about those Speak Out posters, which were in the men's toilets opposite the detainee shop?
Yes.
The ones which had scrawled across it, snitches, grasses, don't be a rat. Were those posters ever taken down and replaced?
I can't remember, sir.
No. Were you ever aware of, for example, when the IMB visiting, whether they may have used those lavatories, whether they ever commented on those posters?
The IMB office was on the ground floor in a corridor in which detainees weren't permitted. Yeah. So I can't see why they would go up onto the first floor onto a detainee corridor and then use a toilet off of the detainee corridor.
So are you saying that there are no circumstances in which any IMB visitor would have had access to that particular
They could have had access to it, and indeed if they were walking past that toilet and they really needed to go, they could have used their keys and gone into the toilet and used the toilet. Nothing stopping them from using it if they wanted to.
But as far as you know, if they did, and if those posters or that poster was still there with that defacement on it, nothing ever happened about it?
No.
Doing your best, how long do you think that poster or those posters were up with the words scrawled across them in the way that you've described? Are we talking about weeks, months?
Months. I mean, I use those association corridors a lot because I was an activities officer and I passed through I passed through that corridor often, and it was the toilet closest to the IT suite. So when I was working in the IT suite, I would use that toilet opposite the detainee shop. Yeah.
Now, you said more than once the reason why eventually, and we'll come to it, I promise, soon, why you went to the BBC rather than to complain to a manager and rather than blow the whistle. Can we just look, please, momentarily at the G4s Whistleblowing Policy? And I'll ask for that to go up on screen. Chair, it's in your files at B107. If we can put up, please, CJS 000707, please, at page 1. Now, forgive me if I've misremembered what you said yesterday, but I think you told us that you didn't become aware that there was a whistleblowing policy until much later. Is that right?
I didn't become aware of the confidential whistleblowing channel until after the Medway programme. Yeah.
And did you also tell us that you weren't aware of this policy at the time of your training?
We were never told about this policy. We were told to raise concerns to DCMs if we had them.
Let's just then look at what this has to say. And I've been asked to ask you these questions in particular on behalf of G4s. So we'd like you, please, to consider this policy document. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that there are boxes which deal with the version control of the policy. And you can see the version date is the 1st of May 2017. Although it was said to expire 2 years later, in other words, when it might be revised. But the key date is the 1st of May, and that's right within our period of what we're looking at in the course of this inquiry. If we go, please, to the next page. You've got a series of dates when it was probably first written back in June 2011, updated version 2.3, right at the bottom of that series of dates, the 1st of April 2017 update, but according to the front pages, we saw the version date was given as the 1st of May. And so it's smack bang within what we've called our relevant period of April through to the end of August. And you see in the box below, internal distribution list, all G4s employees. So that rather suggests that all G4s employees, of which you were one during this period, would or should have got this document. Now, thinking back, did you get this document even if you hadn't heard of it before? In or about May of 2017, you were still there for 2 months to come or more, May, June until the early July when you left. Did you ever see this document?
Don't remember seeing it.
And if we look on the next page, please, under the heading Introduction. At G4s, we all have a responsibility to ensure that we uphold our core business values, adhere to the law, and deliver against the important commitments set out in our business ethics policy. To help strengthen our culture of ethics and integrity, one of our core values, employees are strongly encouraged to report concerns about wrongdoing, such as breaches of laws, regulations, or company policy. This will help G4s to develop an open culture in the dealings between its managers, employees, and those with whom it engages. The group's whistleblowing policy is to be made publicly available, and awareness of the whistleblowing system will be communicated regularly to every employee through a wide range of channels, such as induction courses, welcome documentation, notice boards, intranets, and policy manuals. Now, just pausing there, if that paragraph is accurate, it says it will be communicated regularly rather than has been communicated, but let's assume that this was the original draft from as early as 2011 and it hadn't changed all the way through its different revisions. Will be communicated regularly to every employee through a wide range of channels, such as induction courses. Did you see this in any induction course?
No.
Welcome documentation. Did you receive any form of welcome documentation when you joined the company? Or a welcome pack?
We received quite a big, thick welcome pack.
Yeah. But do you remember seeing this document or anything like it?
No, sir.
Notice boards. Did you see this up on notice boards around the centre?
I only saw the whistleblowing notice, the notice boards with the whistleblowing helpline or the whistleblowing channel.
Yeah.
Much later on, after the Medway programme.
Yeah. Which was 11th or 12th January 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Intranets. Was there an intranet that you had access to?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't even know what that is.
You spoke about a database.
Oh, I see.
No, but an intranet would be, unlike the internet, it's an intranet within an organisation. So it's like an internet, but it's limited to people who have access to it within an organisation. So was there a G4s intranet to which you had access?
I was
Online?
aware of the G4. We had access to all the computers, and on which you had your own username, and you could access the internet, and you could access the G4s database to look up information about detainees. I wasn't aware of a policy being made available on any of these computers.
And policy manuals. Did you get a policy manual?
It's possible that at some point I did get a policy manual in my training. As I say, we got a big, thick kind of booklet. Perhaps hidden in there somewhere, something about whistleblowing existed, but there was no effort to communicate a whistleblowing policy directly to staff.
And then under the next heading, G4s Speak Out, so that's the title that was given to the posters you've been telling us about.
Yes, sir.
And so that we're clear, I keep on calling it a poster or posters. Was it one poster?
Just an A4 piece of paper.
That was it? Laminated or just?
Laminated.
Yeah. serious wrongdoing. Speak Out is G4s's global whistleblowing system, hosted by an independent specialist hotline and case management provider. Speak Out offers a free of charge telephone service and web reporting, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with language translation facilities, and provides a confidential channel for employees to report concerns about serious wrongdoing. And it gives the contact details with certainly, if there's an online version, apparent hyperlinks. Serious wrongdoing is behaviour or actions such as major breaches of group policy or the law, actions that pose a real and significant threat to the well-being or safety of its employees or others, or that may cause serious financial loss. Serious wrongdoing should usually be reported where appropriate to your line manager or local human resources manager in the first instance. So pausing there, who would have been your line manager if you had been aware of this policy? Let's assume you had it and you'd read it through and you'd understood what its terms were and how you could use it. If in the first instance you felt, rather than run off to the BBC as you did, that you should approach your line manager, who would you have regarded as your line manager?
I think this part of the policy was actually was communicated verbally, in that, you know, as I said yesterday, we were told that we could contact DCMs in the first instance if we had concerns about treatment of detainees. My line manager technically was a man called Ramon Geraldo. He was the manager of the activities department, but he had very little interaction or involvement with detainees because he was responsible for managing activities. So
was he a DCM?
He was technically a DCM, yes.
What do you mean by technically?
Well, his role was very different to that of most DCMs, in that he just oversaw. He was just responsible for the activities department. He didn't kind of oversee use of force, planned uses of force,
or go on wings,
or attend wings much, or carry out assessments on detainees when filling out ACDTs with regard to self-harm and suicide. So he had little involvement in the lives of detainees. The DCMs who were responsible, the DCMs who I felt I would go to complain about, I should go to complain about abuse, were the DCMs on the residential units, because that is where the abuse happened, and it was under their management that I was working when I witnessed abuse quite often. So people like Pennell, Dave Roffey, Nathan Ring, the DCMs who were in charge of the units on which abuse was happening, to whom I should be complaining. That's the way I saw it. Were so involved in the abuse that I couldn't go to them.
Yeah. Who was your local human resources manager?
I don't know, sir.
Was there a local human resources manager that you were aware of, even if you didn't know the identity of the person?
If there was one, I wasn't aware of them.
And if we just look up about the policy itself, that paragraph from which I just read, serious wrongdoing is behaviour or actions such as major breaches of group policy or the law, actions that pose a real and significant threat to the well-being or safety of its employees or others. I mean, this is obviously the group policy, so it's not exactly geared towards life at Brook House. But was this message, looking back now, possibly communicated to you when you were trained?
I think the only messaging from the G4s policy about whistleblowing that was communicated to us in our training was that if you have concerns about staff behaviour, whether it's towards detainees or anybody else, then you speak to a DCM in the first instance.
Okay. And then under the heading Other Concerns such as pay-related queries, uniform issues, co-worker disputes or general employment grievances should be directed to a line manager, supervisor or local care line. And then to the next page, please. At the top, anonymity and confidentiality. All concerns raised in good faith will be taken seriously and treated with respect. Any misuse or reporting of alleged wrongdoing that's known not to be correct is unacceptable and will be addressed by the company. The most effective way to raise a concern is to do so openly. Openness makes it easier to assess the concern, investigate where appropriate, and to obtain more information if required. However, we understand that in certain circumstances you may wish to report an issue confidentially. Subject to any legal restrictions, in all circumstances, G4s treats all information reported as confidential. In order to fully investigate issues raised and to comply with applicable laws and regulations, certain information relating to the issue will need to be shared. Anyone investigating a report will be required to keep all information confidential. While we encourage you to identify yourself, anonymous calls will be taken equally seriously and investigated as fully as possible. However, the effectiveness of any investigation may be limited if you choose not to be identified. Subject to local legislative restrictions, it's your decision if you choose to remain anonymous, and there will never be any attempt by the company to track or covertly discover a whistleblower's identity. So, G4s says you can remain anonymous, but if you do, it may make our investigation a little more difficult. They take it seriously. But the messaging here is about respecting you and the information you give, but promising it will be taken seriously. Was that message ever conveyed to you that you remember now?
No. No, sir.
And the woman you told us about, who you became close to, just so that we are clear, did she complain to a manager, or did she, to your knowledge, use this policy?
My understanding is that she complained to the member of the SMT.
Yes, and so she went up the line.
That's what I think.
To a senior management person. Do you know who that person was?
No, sir.
And then back to the policy, process for dealing with whistleblowing matters. Talks about teamwork and collaboration being one of our core values. That when issues arise, the best way to deal with them is for employees to do so with their managers and colleagues and resolve them together constructively. We expect our managers to encourage a culture where employees are confident they can raise concerns without fear of retaliation, and to respond to genuine issues raised by employees in a constructive way. Fear and retaliation is something you've been telling us about, isn't it?
This policy sounds lovely.
In the first instance, we encourage you to raise your concerns through your normal reporting line, HR manager, or the G4s lawyer that supports your team. Was there a G4s lawyer that supports your team?
Not that I was aware of, sir, no.
If you wish to report a serious wrongdoing, or the matter involves a senior manager, such as members of the business, country, or regional management, or the group executive committee, you can contact the G4s Speak Out hotline or website to report these matters. Once the details have been logged by Speak Out, the compliance and ethics team will assess and respond to your concern, performing any necessary investigation in line with group standards. We'll ensure you're not punished in any way for raising a concern in good faith, even if it transpires it was unfounded or the information provided was inaccurate. If you raise a concern, you'll be taken seriously and respected. Any harassment or informal pressure placed upon employees raising concerns will not be tolerated and will be treated as victimization. To the next page, please. At the top, will be treated as victimization, which is a serious offence in accordance with company disciplinary procedures. If, however, you misuse the Speak Out website or hotline, or you knowingly make false allegations, this would be unacceptable and would be treated as a serious disciplinary matter. And then it lists, subject to regional legislative restrictions, what serious wrongdoing looks like, breaches of law or regulation, harassment or discrimination involving senior management, and I'm just picking out 2 or 3, criminal offences, violence or threats of violence by senior managers. And then at the bottom, any person raising concern via Speak Out will be, and you'll see advised how the concern will be handled, given an estimate of how long the investigation will take, and so on and so forth. Just reading it through together, Mr. Tully, as we have, and knowing what you now know, this policy being a group policy and not limited to Brook House, does it speak of relevance to what goes on in Brook House? Is it a policy that works in Brook House from the Brook House you knew?
Well, the policy was never communicated to us.
No, my point's a different one. Now you've read it through with me.
Mm-hmm.
We understand that this is a group policy. It applies across the board. Speak Out is a group-wide whistleblowing policy. But looking at it, does it feel relevant to Brook House? That's not what my question is.
Very little, sir. Very little is relevant.
And what in particular do you think is not relevant to people who are in your position at Brook House?
Price fixing, other cartel or anti-competitive activity, insider training.
What about the, forget that particular, what about the generality? For example, reporting to line managers, G4s lawyers, human resources?
Line managers was applicable and we were told to do that, but in terms of human resources and lawyers, I mean, we didn't even know we had no idea we could do that. I certainly didn't. I should say, though, even if this was communicated to us, which it wasn't, would I have had any confidence going to G4s about my concerns?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, because there was a culture in Brook House which was so hostile towards whistleblowing. And I mean, after the panorama, you may have seen Peter Needon and Jerry Petherick giving evidence to the Home Affairs Committee, and they told us that not a single G4s employee in the relevant period raised a concern about staff treatment of detainees, and yet it's clear from the evidence that I amassed at Brook House and from the video footage that there were members of staff who were otherwise well-behaving officers present in instances of abuse, and no one complained. No one went through the whistleblowing channel because no one had any faith that complaining to G4s would be anything other than fruitless.
Yeah.
And the confidence that staff had, and you'll see it in the footage of my evidence, the confidence that staff had to flagrantly brag about the mistreatment of detainees and speak in derogatory or even racist terms about them in front of groups of officers demonstrated the faith that they had in the culture of silence, which allowed the abuse to persist, because they knew staff would never complain. And I'm sure some staff were aware of this policy. I wasn't. But in any case, I probably wouldn't have raised concerns even if I did.
We're coming in a moment to your initial contact with the BBC, but before I do that, and obviously that was the decision ultimately that you made, and you were influenced, if not encouraged, by viewing that Medway Secure Training Centre programme in January 2016. How was it affecting you from all of the experiences you had? You'd been at the centre effectively by that time around a year, almost.
Yes, sir.
Was it impacting your personal life, what you were seeing?
Well, as I say, I had decided that I would quit before I'd seen the Medway programme and was writing up my resignation letter. I mean, I started working there when I was 18. I was a year on. Obviously, I was 19, and had, whilst my mates had gone off to university, I was cutting ligatures and responding to self-harm incidences and witnessing abuse, and it was having a detrimental effect on my mental health, on the relationships around me, on my refereeing career, which I was still pursuing at that point. And so I didn't feel like I could blow the whistle to anyone. Journalists were never on my radar, never something I'd considered. So I decided that I would leave.
Yeah. But what you did do was to email the Panorama programme.
Yes.
But was that to become directly involved, or did you think that Panorama would themselves just become involved in Brook House as a result of what you were to tell them?
I hoped when I emailed them that they would eventually send in one of their own undercover reporters, and there would be a similar kind of programme.
Yeah.
I never thought I would need to stay in there for another 14 months providing them with information.
Mm.
But I never really wanted to leave without complaining in some form, because the guilt that I would have carried around would have been difficult to live with. It was only when it became too much that I decided that selfishly I would quit. I was open to an opportunity to complain in some form. It just never came about until I saw the Panorama, and then I thought I should stay until Panorama had responded, or give them at least some time to respond to my email.
Now tell us, what did you say in the email, and just so that we have an idea, if the Medway programme went out on the 11th or 12th of January 2016, how soon after that did you send your email?
I think I sent it on the 12th of January 2016.
Right.
So either the day after I watched the programme or on the same day.
And who did you send the email to?
There's just a generic BBC Panorama email.
And what did you say in the email?
I said, I can't remember off the top of my head word for word, but it was something along the lines of, I've seen the Medway programme, I'm an officer at Brook House, I've been keeping a record of what I've been witnessing, I'm concerned about the treatment of detainees,
Yeah.
words to that effect.
And the record you'd been keeping, what was that?
Well, after the incident I spoke about yesterday, in which a detainee was mocked and humiliated while standing naked in front of at least 5 members of staff, I had gone. When I was refereeing when I was younger, I would record instances of. I would make notes after games that I'd refereed, things that had gone badly, as a way of kind of managing my emotions and reflecting on things. And as I didn't really want to tell anyone what I was seeing at Brook House. I certainly didn't want to tell my mum, because she found me the job in the first place, and she would have been upset to have sort of. It was because of her that I was working there, really, because she found the job. So I was keeping notes in a little black pocket book that I used to keep my refereeing notes in about instances of abuse that concerned me and were upsetting me, and it was just a way of me managing my emotions.
And what happened to that notebook?
Well, the BBC never asked for it until much later.
Yeah.
By which time I looked for it, but I couldn't find it.
Having sent that email to Panorama, was there a response?
There was a response, yes.
How immediate?
Quite quick, I think. I think it was a matter of days, if
And
not.
who was it who got in touch with you?
A journalist called Guy Grandjean.
Grandjean. And did you speak to Mr. Grandjean
I did.
on the phone?
Yes, and I visited him in London at New Broadcasting House.
Yeah. And we don't have to go into all of the ins and outs of the processes, because that's not really what this inquiry is all about. But just to help people understand how really we got to where we are now, what was arranged between you after that first meeting?
Well, I was not working for the BBC. I was working with the BBC.
Yeah.
It was agreed that I would provide them with information, intelligence about what I was seeing in Brook House. There was no promise that they would send in one of their reporters, but they were keen to find out what was happening in the detention centre. I mean, for me, it was difficult because I didn't know. I would like to have known. I would like to have been given a yes or no answer. If the answer was no, we're not interested, then I could have just quit and tried to move on with my life. But the answer was, oh, we might, but there's no guarantee. So, you know, if you want to leave, you can leave. There was never pressure on me to remain working there if that's not what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But, I mean, in reality, as I said, I felt guilty about things I'd seen, and even though I never participated in abuse, I was still a cog in an inhumane machine in which drove people to, you know, complete despair.
Mm.
So I always felt a sense of guilt about working there, and I saw, you know, my work with the BBC as an opportunity to try and change that. So whilst I was never technically under pressure from the BBC to remain there, I felt the burden and the responsibility to continue working there, because I didn't know how else change might come about if the BBC didn't. So for as long as the BBC were remotely interested, I was intent on sticking around, with the hope that if they did make a film, it would bring about some closure of my own. I mean, I was young and naive then. I thought as soon as people saw the realities inside Brook House that, you know, there would be widespread calls for change, and the Home Office would apologise for what was happening under their watch, and obviously none of that certainly didn't happen. And I mean, a few members of staff got sacked, but what else has really changed? I mean, but at the time I thought, you know, if people are given an insight into what it's like in there, then, you know, society, the public, people won't stand for it.
So you carry on working at Brook House, feeding information to the BBC from time to time, presumably?
Yes, I was effectively a mole for the BBC for 14 months before wearing secret cameras. I was making diary entries every day after every shift, and then on my days off I was sending those notes to the BBC. I would just take pictures of the notes and send them on.
Although the notes that I referred to some minutes ago, those contemporaneous diaries, several of them that you made, are those the notes you're talking about?
Yeah, I continued making notes when I started working for the BBC,
but we've got notes before and we've got notes afterwards.
Yes, the notes from the point at which I made contact with the BBC.
Yeah,
we have copies of all of them.
Okay, and you've seen them, obviously. And,
yes, I made them. So.
Yeah. So you carry on working at Brook House apart from one break, and that was something you referred to yesterday, the Chickenpox Outbreak.
Yes.
Which meant you were transferred to Tinsley House, and that was March 2016?
Yes, sir.
And how long were you at Tinsley for?
A couple of weeks, sir.
And once chickenpox outbreak was clear, or it was safe for you to come back to work at Brook House?
Yes,
you did?
when it was clear, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And you say that you returned to Brook House in the middle of April 2016. I'm picking that up from paragraph 85 of your inquiry statement. You'd remained in touch with Mr. Grandjean all the time up to that point, but you say your primary point of contact at the BBC changed in mid-April to the Panorama producer Joe Plummin.
Plomin, sir, yes.
Plomin, is it? So, and what was the point of that? Why did he take over?
Well, at the time I wasn't quite sure, to be honest, but then it became clear to me that the BBC were probably getting more serious about the prospect of an undercover investigation, because Joe Plomans has overseen some of the BBC's most high-profile undercover investigations.
Yeah.
The Medway one, for example, you may remember the Winterbourne View undercover, in which people with learning difficulties were being abused in a care home.
Right.
So he's kind of the BBC's top dog, if you like, in terms of managing undercover investigations.
And so, cutting perhaps matters short, you carried on making the notes. That was a suggestion, I think, that you were asked to carry on making those contemporaneous diaries, and you did. There came a point where you became an employee of the BBC.
Yes, sir.
And just tell us a little about that, how that came about and when it came about.
Well, a year after giving evidence to the BBC.
Right, well, hold on. giving evidence, you mean giving information.
Yes.
And so, where do you fix in time a year after giving an account to the BBC? What month are we talking about?
So the Medway programme goes out on the
January.
11th of January, 12th of January. I blow the whistle at that point.
Yeah.
13, 14 months later.
All right. So what?
And during those 14 months, I've been
Yeah.
giving information to the BBC.
Yeah.
So on that prima facie evidence, and that of another G4s employee, Nathan Ward,
Yeah.
that the BBC feels it should, and that it's in the public interest to investigate Brook House.
Right. So at that point, Panorama decides to use you as an undercover operative, an undercover reporter.
Yes.
And is it at that point you become an employee?
Yes, so around the 6th of March, 2017.
Yeah. And around that time, when you formally began your employment with the BBC, and this is paragraph 90 onwards of your inquiry statement, between the 6th of March of 2017 and the 23rd of April 2017, did you complete a period of training with the BBC?
Yes, sir.
Now, how did you do that when you were still working at Brook House?
On my days off, sir.
So what, weekends or other days off?
I would have, I'd work an average of 4 days a week.
Yeah,
48 hours a week, 13-hour shifts,
yeah.
52 hours a week if you include the unpaid breaks. So yes, but I would have 3 days off a week. So.
And would that mean travelling to London for training?
Yes. I think I took some annual leave around that time as well.
Yeah. And
To allow
what
me
did
some
the
time to train.
training consist of?
Well, I had to undergo all the compulsory sort of just general training that BBC Panorama employees have to undergo, so media law and anti-bribery, BBC's editorial guidelines, stuff that's really required of all BBC employees. And then there was specific training around the use of secret cameras and associated techniques, and there was quite a lot of focus was on that. I was obviously introduced to the kit I would be wearing,
Yeah.
how to wear it. I mean, there's only so much I can say.
The kit, obviously being a microphone and a camera. I'm not going to ask you anything technical about that for obvious reasons, but that's the kit that you mean.
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to do, please, is to just look together with you at a document we all have, which is the protocol for undercover operatives.
Yes, sir.
It's CPS 000025. Can we put that up, please? We'll start at the first page. And this document, can we just look at the header? Thank you. Panorama, undercover, Brook House. So it already had a title, the programme, at that point, by the look of it. Or a working title,
maybe,
perhaps.
sir. Maybe.
Yeah. Protocol for undercover operative. Document is intended as guidance, not as prescriptive. Impossible to outline every possible scenario. In the event that the safety of detainees or officers, the safety of our operative, which is you, and or the integrity of our journalistic enterprise is best safeguarded by deviating from our document, that's what our operative should do. However, wherever practicable, that should be in consultation with the producer and editorial policy advisors. Where the operative is in any doubt, they should consult with the production team, but can also contact the external risk specialists we've engaged to support this operation. And then the contents of the document are set out: the risk assessment, legal and employee guidelines our operative must consider, guiding principles, privacy, and some hypothetical examples. Under risk assessment, please note the risk assessment is the primary document and should always be read in preference to this document, so that we understand it. Was that a completely different document then to what we're now looking at? Was there a risk assessment document?
There was, sir, yes.
Do you have it?
No, sir, the BBC will have it, though.
Right. And then legal and employer guidelines our operative must consider. You'll remember we looked at this yesterday, Rule 45, and we went through that. And over the page, please. I'm not going to read all of it, but the document is adduced in full and will be published in full, subject to redaction. And then 3 towards the bottom, guiding principles. Towards the bottom, please. However, our evidence suggests that other members of staff may carry out actions that do not meet those, or indeed external legal stroke guideline requirements. Our members of staff may instruct the undercover operative to assist them when they are doing something the undercover operative believes to be wrong. Other members of staff may ask the undercover operative to encourage them or to comment on their behaviour. Our operative will need to weigh every situation against the broad protocol that, unless there is a good reason not to, our operative should comply with requests. Our operative must not cause any harm or break the law themselves, except where agreed, for example, bringing cameras into a centre. Our operative must not encourage anyone else to cause harm or break the law. Our operative must keep themselves safe, should neither cause nor encourage, but also will not be able to prevent all wrongdoing by others. Where there is a significant risk of imminent serious harm to an individual, our operative needs to be prepared to intervene directly or immediately. Any intervention by the operative also needs to be appropriate. Our operative should minimise the impact of their secret filming on the privacy of detainees as much as it's possible to do so. And it tells you in the final 2 lines of that particular section, if you were discovered, you leave the place.
Yes, sir, if it was possible.
Yeah. Privacy, that you had to be aware that secret recording potentially breaches the privacy of detainees, and you had that in mind throughout your filming.
Yes, sir. And staff.
Sorry?
And staff.
Yeah. And then over the page, we have handling of material, which I'm not going to go into, and then at the bottom, hypothetical examples. And there are a series of hypothetical examples, lots of what-ifs, to help you in your position to understand what you could and couldn't or should and shouldn't do. But these were only hypothetical, and presumably when you were involved yourself in filming, you had to make decisions as and when they were necessary.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, we often see you, while I have this in mind, or perhaps more accurately, hear you question other officers. What would you do if?
Yes.
What do you think of? So
Yes.
these are open, if you like, non-leading questions.
Yes.
Were they deliberate?
Yes, it was important not to ask leading questions because you can't be seen to be on a fishing expedition. You know, you ask open questions so people will have the opportunity to answer one way or another. You're not kind of cornering someone. So what do you make of this? What do you make of that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's up to you how you answer such a question. There's
Yeah.
nothing suggestive in such a question.
Yeah. And can we go, please, to page 13, because I want to ask you about something else that appears in this document. We go to the top of the page. You'll see the date, the 19th of April 2017, day -2 cameras before start kit failure. Now, first of all, sometimes the kit didn't work and filming failed. Whose notes are these?
These are the BBC production team's notes.
So told it's called an incident log, but
Yes, sir.
where did the content come from?
So the Joe Plomin, the producer director, or Josh Reynolds, the assistant producer, will have gone over the footage and made these notes. So on this day of a kit failure, I think I was recording in terms of the microphones were picking up the sound, but the visuals weren't there. So they were still able to get a gist of what was happening. So although there was a kit failure, I think they've still made some notes here about what they believe was happening on this shift.
So these were not your notes?
No, sir.
This was not a result of a debrief of you at the end of the day. This was them taking at the end of the day the film from you.
Yes, sir.
And doing whatever they do with it, listening to it or watching it or both.
Yes, sir.
And then recording on this incident log what they see and hear.
Yes, sir. So I'd film when I got back from a shift. I'd give them the card, and then the next day, whilst I was on shift, they would usually review the footage that I'd filmed the previous day.
Okay. Can we go to the very end of this document just to see? I'm not going to go through the content. We may come back to one or two later, but right to the end, page 37, please. It's the penultimate page, actually. And the very last day of this is the 6th of July, 2017, which is the day you quit, finally, and walk out.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So a series of logs, incident logs, of what happened according to the footage.
Yes, sir.
Did you think that the training that you had was sufficient to equip you for the reality of acting as an undercover operative?
Yes, sir.
Were you confident in what you did?
It's hard to be as confident as you can be wearing secret cameras into a prison with hostile staff. I mean, it was. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't in a complete state of anxiety for the 2.5 months that I was wearing secret cameras.
Yeah.
Was that because of a lack of confidence? No, it was just a fear of being caught.
Yeah. And did the BBC provide you with support throughout?
Yes.
What kind of support, in a word or two?
Well, the BBC has sort of internal people that you can go to, if you are struggling with your mental health. But they also provided me with a psychiatrist, Professor Peter Kinderman. He was responsible for looking after me. I think he's the professor of psychology at the University of Liverpool or something. He was there whenever I needed him, and I often used his support. It was tough, you're working in complete secrecy. You can't tell your friends or your family, and you're bearing witness to stuff which is troubling you. The psychological support from the BBC was welcome, definitely.
And the nature of the camera itself, as I say, I don't want particularly technical detail, but you deal with this at paragraph 100, page 24 of your inquiry statement. You say it had a variable battery life, usually in the region of 4 hours.
Yes, sir.
Your shifts, as you've told us more than once, were 13 hours long, so it wasn't possible to keep the camera running at all times during the shift. But at all events, you wouldn't keep the camera continuously running, but you would switch it on and off as necessary. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In line with the guidelines you'd been trained in, particularly guidance regarding minimising impact on the privacy of detainees and staff.
Yes, sir.
Just as an aside, just help us. What was it that would lead you to switch the camera on and off? In other words, in what kind of, maybe you can't generalise, but were there typical situations in which you would decide, I Callum Tully, I'm now going to turn on the camera for this or that reason, and then I'm going to turn it off. What were the decisions you were making and why?
Well, it would require, sir, a judgment call on your part. I mean, if a first response is called, and a first response is when there's essentially an emergency announced on the radio, then that's a good indication that something of note is going to happen, so you turn your camera on.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're walking onto the solitary confinement block or onto segregation, where, you know, if most of we know from the evidence that I amassed, that's where a lot of the abuse would take place. So you are more likely to switch your camera on whilst on the block. Equally, if you were in the gatehouse, you were very unlikely to turn on your secret camera because
nothing's going to happen.
It's precisely so.
Yeah. So that was the way you
yes,
ran things.
It would require a judgment call, and sometimes you turn on the camera because you think a conversation is going in one direction, but actually it goes in a different direction, and at that point you're sort of unnecessarily filming, and there are a couple of options to you. The first is that you can just switch the camera off. If that is going to arouse suspicion, which it would most likely do if you're in front of colleagues, then you can try and sort of get up and go to the toilet, so continue filming, but not pick up any of the sort of collateral material.
Yeah.
But yes, but I mean it's important to know that anything that was filmed that wasn't, you know, of note or in the public interest was only seen by a very limited number of BBC colleagues. I'd be surprised if it was as much as half a dozen. So any invasions of privacy were treated very very seriously and seen by as few people as possible.
I mean,
it was inevitable that, you know, because of the nature of secret filming, that you're going to pick up some stuff sometimes, but every effort was made for that not to happen.
I mean, in one sense, much of what you filmed was private to somebody.
Yes.
What did you regard as an invasion of privacy for the purposes of filming?
Well, I remember sitting in the E-Wing office, and there was a conversation about a detainee which I felt we should be recording, but the conversation quickly turned to the officer and his wife and kids, and that was a scenario when I was able to stand up and just leave the wing office. Yeah. But that's an example of you know, stuff that doesn't need to be recorded. You know.
And was there anything in particular as regards any detained persons that you felt overstepped the mark, so that you shouldn't film?
Not that I can remember, sir. I mean, I never felt like I shouldn't be. I mean, I never decided to film when I knew I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
There were just times when I thought, okay, I'm still rolling now, and the moment's passed, the instant's over.
All right.
You need to leave or turn it off when it's appropriate.
At the end of a shift, you would drive to an agreed location where you would meet the producers, and would that be the time that you would record your video diaries?
Yes, sir.
And what was the point of the video diary? Was that just to record what had happened? Because what we sometimes see is you being asked to repeat the same account time and again, or you've forgotten something, or perhaps you think you can put it in a better way. So was the idea of the video diary not just a record, but also potentially something that might go out on the Panorama programme?
I think with it, yes, it's precisely. I mean, it's a record to start with, but also it might help narrate the film. So there was sort of, in terms of production value, there was also a need to do it as well.
Yeah. My memory serves me, but maybe you'll correct me. I think there was only one video diary that actually went out on the programme, and that was the 25th of April one, I think. Or am I wrong about that?
I think there was more, sir, if I'm honest.
Was there more?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't viewed the programme for a long time, but
yes.
But it was a dual purpose.
Yes, sir.
To creating them.
It helped bring the viewer through the film and understand what they were witnessing.
And you say at paragraph 102 in the video diary, I would summarise the shift. as you already agreed, in any particularly notable events which had occurred, I recorded, and these are the statistics. I recorded video diaries on 38 days in total during the filming period, which was from the 19th of April, and we saw that date on the incident log, to the 7th of July inclusive. In fact, the last day was the 6th of July. In my police witness statement, I referred, and you made a police witness statement to Sussex Police when they were investigating certain incidents, or one incident in particular. In my police witness statement, I referred to there being 33 video diaries recorded during the period 24th of April to the 6th of July 2017, which was an inadvertent calculation error which came to light when the BBC disclosed all the diaries to the inquiry. But you say, in fact, you recorded video diaries on 36 days during the period. After you say you completed the video diary, you would then complete your written diary entry as well. And we have those.
Yes, sir.
I always completed written notes, and these record the events of the relevant shift. And then just reading in what you said at paragraph 103, once I'd completed my video and written diary entries, I would talk with the Panorama production team. We would discuss the day's shift and often the previous day's footage, as I indicated earlier and you agreed,
Yes,
which
sir.
they'd reviewed. The team might ask questions about the footage or particular events shown in it. If I'd not covered a particular point in my video and written entries for the last shift, or if they had a particular question, for example, about the name of an officer or a detainee.
Yes, sir.
And you say that if the production team asked about events on the footage, or if you remembered an event or a detail which you'd not mentioned in the written or your video diary for the previous shift, you'd make a supplemental note to that written entry indicating that it had been added at a later stage, and occasionally you'd also make a supplemental record by discussing an earlier incident in a later video diary.
Yes, sir.
So that's the way it worked. And paragraph 105, you say your first day of successful filming, by which you mean without any kit failure,
Yes, sir.
at Brook House was on the 24th of April.
Yes, sir.
And the last day of filming, and your last day at Brook House was in fact the 6th of July, 2017. And again, the numbers from the 24th of April to the 6th of July inclusively, you worked 37 shifts at Brook House. You successfully undertook secret filming on 34 of those 37 shifts. And the incident log, which we have up on screen, records that there were equipment failures on certain days of the filming. We don't have to look at them, but this incident log records those failures. We've already seen one. Right. Moving on then, please, from that to some other aspects of your time at Brook House. And while I have it in mind, one of the questions which one of the core participants has asked me to ask on their behalf, and this is on behalf of one of the solicitors' firms acting for a number of detained persons. And it's something really I touched on yesterday, and we'll come to some of the examples later, particular incidents. But while I have it in mind, you started work, as you've told us there, in 2015.
Yes, sir.
And the development of your thinking and what you did as a result of your views of what was going on really began quite early on, and it developed through to 2016. When you saw the Medway programme, you sent your email, you kept your diary of events, and then you went through the process you've just been telling us about. And what we would like to understand, please, Mr. Tully, so that we can always have this in mind, because of course you know that we're going to pluck out events during our relevant period from with one exception. I'm going to ask you about something that happened and you witnessed on the 6th of March 2016, but apart from that, we're looking at events from April through to the end of August.
Yes, sir.
Well, in fact, July, as far as you're concerned, because you stopped filming in early July. And so what we would like to understand from you is the extent to which what you filmed between April and July 2017 represented events which had gone before. For example, from January 15 to early 2016, that period you were telling us about, and then from January, early 2016, February 2016 onwards through to July 2017 when you left. But really the whole period, because it's important that when eventually we come to hear your evidence about and view certain clips of footage, it could be tempting to think that that's it. That's the high point. What we really want to understand from you is, should we be thinking that is it, that's all it is, and that period that we have characterised as a relevant period is all that Brook House is about, or did it really start from the beginning when you started working there? Do you understand the question?
I do, and I think I do anyway.
In other words, are they simply representative of something that you weren't able to film because you hadn't gone to the BBC? Was all of this stuff going on in much the same way
Yes.
throughout that period? That's really the question.
I mean, I suppose the reason why the inquiry are interested in the relevant period, April to August,
It's because of your filming.
it's because of my filming. But to me, it's the years and months before that were just as relevant,
Yeah.
if not more relevant, because at least I was able to capture some of the abuse during between March and between April and August.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, to be honest, it's not the things I saw whilst secretly filming undercover which trouble me most, because I filmed it so the world can see it. But it's the stuff that I witnessed before I started wearing secret cameras. You know, which I know you're going to ask me about one incident in particular. That, you know, that's the hardest stuff, because those officers have gotten away with it, and it seems G4s and the Home Office are only being held accountable for the months of April to August, and I hope that's not going to be the case, because the abuse was not exclusive to those months.
Yeah. And of course, one of the things, in fact, I described during the course of the opening statement was the incident on the 25th of April, the Pascali incident, to which we will come. Would you say that was the high point of anything that you saw during your time there? I mean, if my memory serves me, during the video diary that you made afterwards, you made comment that was off the scale, or a different scale to anything that you'd ever seen. Is that right, or is that a complete outlier?
I think the Pascali choke on D1527 was there's two incidents which was kind of off the scale, and that was one of them. Another one was before I started wearing secret cameras, which I think you're going to ask me about shortly.
Which date is that? The 6th of March one?
Yes, I think so.
2016.
In which a mentally ill detainee was mocked by two DCMs whilst
Roffey and
covered in his own theses on the segregation.
Come to that.
Yeah. But those two incidents, I mean, they were rare.
Yeah.
But they were only incidents that I saw. I'm not saying, you know. And, you know, yesterday I spoke to you about whether I believed the George Michael Masks incident. And at the time I didn't believe it. But the sadistic way in which D1527 was abused, and in which this Eritrean detainee was abused in March 2016, you know, I later formed the view that perhaps it did happen. As I say, I've seen no evidence that it did happen, but it would no longer surprise me, because although it was such an act of unbelievable cruelty, it's a level of cruelty I ended up witnessing at Brook House.
Yeah.
But I rarely saw instances of such cruelty.
Yeah. I mean,
but I did see them.
Yeah, I mean, you're only one person, and I think the point you're making is there may have been other incidents you simply weren't present for, whether before you started filming or during.
Indeed.
But let me ask you this, did anybody ever bring to your attention, anybody to whom you were close and perhaps was in the same camp as you, if I can call it that, any instances which came close to the two instances in particular you're talking about?
Not that bad, not that bad.
And so we might be able to treat these as our high points. There was a lot in between about which you will be telling us, but was there a lot of low-level stuff as well?
I mean, you heard about assaults, you heard about abuse and physical mistreatment of detainees, but just not as bad as, not as horrific as the ones we're going to be talking about this week.
And what about really low-level stuff? Was there anything that you would sort of classify or categorize as just the ordinary, I mean, real banter that perhaps wasn't as important as some of the other things you'll be telling us about?
What do you mean, sir? Sorry.
Well, low-level misconduct or
but
exchanges.
then that was just every day.
Yeah.
That was the culture. I mean. Yeah, there was just low level banter, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
That was unprofessional and yeah. I mean,
all right. Well, maybe.
Do you want me to give examples?
No. We'll come back to other examples, I'm sure. But it's perhaps therein lies the difficulty of trying to categorise these things too closely.
Yeah, and it's hard to kind of. I mean, perhaps this is a transgression, so I apologise, but you were constantly bearing witness to the conditions in which the detainees were held. So even if you went through phases in which you weren't seeing abuse, the indefinite nature of the detention still remained, and that was the most destructive element of detention. I mean, it destroyed detainees. It completely stripped them of any sort of hope, and you could see the deterioration in the well-being of detainees over time, arriving at the centre with some hope that if they kept themselves together, things would be fine. And as the weeks and months would pass on, and there was no prospect of release or removal, you'd see people that were sort of seemingly together and become, starts to self-harm and take drugs or attempt to take their own lives. It was, and perhaps if you ask D1527 what the worst element of detention was, he'll say it was when Pascali choked him. But I'm sure for many detainees, it was not the abuse that was the worst element. It was the indefinite nature of the detention which was the hardest thing, and that was visible. It was a tangible impact that you could see with your own eyes as an officer, because I worked there for 2.5 years.
And what about?
And so I wasn't someone that came in and left because they couldn't. People started working at Brook House and they just quickly left because it was such a bleak place. So perhaps some staff didn't see the impact of indefinite detention on detainees. As someone that worked there for 2.5 years, not only would you see people first arrive, presenting themselves well, clean-shaven, wearing a suit, making their legal appointments with their solicitors, and trying to be positive, because they shouldn't be. They'd say, I shouldn't be here. I won't be here for long. I'm going to get myself out of here. When it would become apparent to them that was not the case, it was disastrous, the impact that this would have on them, and people going into Brook House without real mental health problems of their own without being professional, you could see that they were developing. Yeah,
and so we've got two aspects, is what you're talking about. One shouldn't focus too closely just on the incidents, the individual incidents themselves.
Yes.
Secondly, it was the individual conditions for individuals, how long they were actually going to be there. And there's a third, really, isn't there? The conditions of detention themselves.
Yes.
In other words, the lavatories, food, all of these things, the conditions generally.
Yes.
We'll talk a little about that
It's easy
later.
to focus on the abuse, sir, but you set that aside, and it's a system which strips people of all their hope, and because someone's released, you know, I'd see people returning. I'd see a detainee released on bail only to return a few weeks later, and then they're in an even worse state because they're going to have to go through it all over again. There was a conveyor belt of detainees. You start seeing the same faces, only greyer hair, more wrinkles, longer beards, because they were started to become less well kept and gain weight, and some of them would start to take drugs or, as I say, self-harm. It was such a it was just grim. The harm that it was having on people who weren't even being abused, you know, physically by staff.
Well, thanks.
Go on,
one more
sorry,
thing, because
sir,
I was going.
Just one other thing
Yeah.
I'd say is that it's also, if you focus on the individuals who were abusing detainees, that's also kind of missing the point, because it's clear from the evidence that I amassed during my time at Brook House that although the abuse of detainees was consistent throughout my time there, the officers and managers responsible for it changed over time. So it wasn't because of the abuse was not because of a few bad apples operating unbeknown to others, but it was because of systemic cultural problems which gave rise to such abuse and allowed it to fester and go unchecked.
Yeah.
So when abusive member of staff left, you know, they were just replaced by others, because it was, you know, the system permitted such behaviour.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we'll stop there for the moment, I think, Mr. Tully. It's about 23 minutes past 11. Chair, shall I suggest we should aim to come back about 22? If that's not too short a break. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
No, I always know when it's a break, but I wasn't going to stop.
No, fair enough.
Give me a moment, please. Mr. Tully, we've been asked on behalf of Owen Syred, who's another core participant in this inquiry, to ask you a few questions about the nature of what you were doing. Now, as far as you're concerned, clearly you were filming incidents. You were occasionally asking open questions in the way that you described a little earlier. If on occasions we see you participate in the exchanges or in what was going on, why would that be? And I can give you a couple of examples in a second, but
Yes.
in general
Well,
terms?
in general, you had to maintain your cover.
Yeah.
That's the simple answer.
Maintaining your legend as a legitimate DCO, certainly somebody who wasn't acting undercover.
Precisely. I couldn't give any indication to anyone that I was acting undercover. I mean, of course, when D1527 was choked, that was an occasion in which I had to intervene, as envisaged in the undercover protocol, which governed my role as a BBC journalist. But it was important for me to, on the most part, not encourage nor discourage anything that was anything wrong. I mean, I needed to be a fly on the wall, and I couldn't have people suspecting me, so at times it might have been necessary, in order to maintain my cover, to carry myself in such a way that I wasn't to be suspected.
Yeah. Let me then give you a couple of examples. Can we put up on screen a transcript, please? TRN 000000, and then there's another 02. So I think it should be 6 zeros followed by a 2. I can't hear you.
I just lost connection. I can't connect
You've lost connection.
to the internet.
Have we? I just wonder if the transcribers have got an internet problem as well.
I wonder that too.
Well, perhaps we better stop.
I think,
Mr. Tully, we call this a technical hitch. You'll have been used to them, I suspect.
Indeed.
Chair, can we invite you to rise for as long as it takes? Thank you very much. Don't worry.
All right.
I thought so. I did say that I'd lost the internet as well. Thank you. I was about to ask to put up on screen TRN 0000002. And this is a transcript of something that happened after the chokehold incident on the 25th of April. And if we can just zoom into the top line for the moment, just so that we can get into the trigger. No, the very top, the title of this page, thank you. And we'll see that we'll see this kind of reference often in the future, either when we come to play clips or we look at transcripts. I have no idea what KENCOV, we've come to call it KENCOV, means, but the 4 digits are a reference, a number reference that we will see change from time to time according to the footage we're looking at or the transcript from the footage that we are reading. The next number is of more importance and has more information within it, because in this instance it's V 2017, so that's the year date, 0425, 25th of April 2017, and it's clip number 00021. And so I don't know if you were familiar with these, Mr. Tully, or not, but we've become fairly familiar with them. And this is the kind of reference that we're going to see from time to time, as I say, on clip footage or transcripts from the footage. In this instance, we can zoom back out, please. This is a transcript of footage that you filmed after that incident on the 25th of April. Do you remember? And again, we'll look at it later. You went to the loo where you broke down, and then when you came out, this is a transcript of what we see. And if we can just zoom into the top half of the page. Forgive me, my fault, page 12. It's page 12 that we want to look at. Top half. Thank you. And I don't know if you remember now, but you come out and we can see you say, "Are you all right, mate? You're good, yeah?" And somebody who's only identified as staffer number 5 says, "Yeah." And you say, "You're all right, you have to go on. Something's inaudible. Good, yeah." And then this, "Fuck off, don't touch my phone." Now, the question is, and the question that's been posed as part of the questions I was asking before we had to break, is, given everything that had occurred, and you'd gone to the toilet, you'd broken down, we've seen that, certainly on Panorama, and you come out and you say that, was that genuine, or were you just acting out a part? In other words, were you upset, and did somebody try to touch your phone, and did you say that because of upset, or was it for any other reason?
Well, this I can remember this not particularly clearly, because my memory relates to the choking incident, the attempts by the detainee to harm himself, and the fear of being caught because a microphone had became loose during the restraint. But
And you forgive me, when you're in the loo and you're filming that, I mean, there's a lot of effing and blinding.
yes,
But at the same time, you do mention something to do with the microphone. Microphones come loose.
yeah, I became aware during the restraint that a microphone became loose, so I was anxious not to be. I thought I was going to be exposed. That was part of the reason why I went to the toilet, because I was upset, two, because I was anxious about this microphone.
Yeah.
I mean, this was the most distressing, one of the most distressing things I'd ever seen in my life. I'd left the toilet. I wanted to run away from Brook House at the time, and I just had to return to E-Wing, where I just witnessed a suicidal detainee being throttled and threatened to put to sleep. I knew that in my possession, in my crutch, was an SD card which had this evidence of abuse on it. it was imperative for me not to be exposed. Whether it was a detainee or a member of staff who tried to touch my radio, in this case it was a detainee, I don't know why I refer to it as a phone, that risks exposure. If they feel one of the many wires running through your body, or the camera lens, or the microphone, or the battery pack, if they alert a member of staff, then that recording equipment's going to be taken from you, and I have no doubt that the footage I recorded would never have seen the light of day. So it was imperative for me to make it known to the detainee that he was not welcome to invade my personal space and touch my radio.
I see.
So I could have communicated this in a couple of ways. I didn't want to use any force on the detainee. I didn't feel it was necessary, but I did feel it was necessary to say robustly to the detainee that he was not welcome to touch me. I could have used language in a strong manner. I could have probably shouted at the detainee and said, "Get off, step off, back off." Instead, I didn't shout, but I said, "Fuck off."
So,
It's
no, carry on, sorry.
it is regrettable language, but
I'm not really asking you about the language, and, you know, it's language everybody's used to these days.
particularly in prisons.
But what I'm really asking you about, so that we understand, is because this was part of a theme that we've been asked to put to you on behalf of one of the core participants, is whether that was poor behaviour by you, whether you were just acting out your legend, as it were, or whether you were genuinely upset at what had happened, or was this a part of everything?
It was a combination of all of those things. It was me protecting my cover, carrying myself in a way that didn't arouse suspicion in others. It was me trying to ensure that I wasn't exposed. And it was me protecting my personal space, which had been invaded. So,
Yeah. Where was the radio mounted at the time, or was it in your hand?
On my hip, just to the right of
I see.
the recorder.
Yeah. A second example, and as I say, we'll come back to the 25th of April later, but a second example which I'm going to ask you about is one that we can also put up on screen, another transcript. Chair, I should have said that the first transcript, if you're making a note, is at your B96.
Thank you.
And the next one at B101 is transcript 000079. 000079. We'll see it's a different style of transcript because it's being transcribed by another outfit. This is Kenkov 1027, so we can see the number has changed. It's for Wednesday the 31st of May. And if we go please to, first of all, your witness statement, please, because you refer to it at paragraph 159 onwards. So we can pick it up from your witness statement and in the transcript at page 7. We're going slightly forwards, but I just want to deal with that now. We'll go back again. Paragraph 159, you're dealing with meal times and food and fluid refusal. And then at 161, and this is the background to what I'm going to ask you about in a moment, I observed a member of staff failing to properly observe the monitoring requirement. That's monitoring what? Food.
Food and fluid intake, yes.
And as I say, we'll deal with that a little later. On the 31st of May 2017, I reported a food refusal to DCM Nathan Ring.
Yes, sir.
Whilst covering a break on B Wing. A detainee whose name I cannot now recall had told me that he was refusing food, apparently because he'd not been transferred. I reported this to DCM Ring, who told me to, quote, cross him off, end quote. I recalled that the detainee had eaten. Ring then referred to the detainee in disparaging terms and told me that he was aware the detainee had said he wasn't going to eat unless he was transferred. The detainee's name should not have been crossed off because he hadn't eaten, This was the mechanism for monitoring whether detainees were eating, and so no record was being made of his food refusal. And you refer to a note that you made in one of your notebooks, which you do. We don't have to go to it now. But let's just then look at the transcript, please. Because this is the transcript that relates to what you've just said in your inquiry statement. You say, I will wait till, is that 10-7, 107? He's not eaten, so they won't transfer him?
Yeah, I went to room 107.
It's room 107?
Yes.
And so that's on that wing?
Yes. B wing room 107. He's not eaten, so they won't transfer him.
Yeah.
Because they won't transfer him, I think is what was said, actually.
Yeah. And so he says, oh, fucking something, I will fucking cross him off the prick. So let's be clear, crossing him off, and again, I'm going to ask you to explain this a little more closely in a while, but crossing him off means what?
To tick the checklist to say that he has eaten.
Right, so to pretend that somebody has eaten when in fact they haven't.
Yes. So.
And you add, because he's refusing, and Nathan Ring, well, don't worry about him, and you say, shall I cross him off? Now, why are you offering to cross him off when Nathan Ring says, I will cross him off?
The transcript is not right, I'm afraid. He says, oh, fucking cross him off.
Yeah, I see.
The prick. He doesn't say that. He doesn't voluntarily say he'll cross him off. I think if we can look back at the footage, and I think that would be
all right.
obvious to us. So I've been instructed by a manager, by my superior, to cross him off. And so I acted as envisaged in the BBC protocol for undercover operatives, which governed my role as an undercover reporter. And I did as envisaged in that protocol. However, I did still check that was actually what he wanted me to do.
Yeah.
So I gave my manager, my superior, an opportunity to give me some different advice. So I asked him, again, I checked, shall I cross him off?
And he says, yeah, penis?
Yes.
Spat his dummy out, said, what's happening, told him to wait. And he just said, well, I'm not going to eat if you won't tell me what's happening. Okay, see you later, penis. And you say, I said to him, do you want to eat or not? Then you say, according to this, did you get any soup?
Yeah,
And
Nathan wanted to get some soup for another detainee.
I see. And Ring says, I just chucked another bowl at him. What a needy fucker he is. Was the needy fucker the person that you were originally talking about, or somebody entirely different?
It's about a different detainee who had
Yeah.
asked. He was on crutches and in his cell, so
see.
he asked DCM Ring if he would get him some soup.
Yeah. And as you say, a little further down, he's got crutches.
Yes.
All right. So that's just an example of, you say, not where you're participating, but where you are in accordance with the guidelines, which we referred to a little earlier, acting out your role, but at the same time, in this instance, giving Nathan Ring an opportunity to make perfectly clear what he's telling you.
Indeed, sir.
Or to countermand it.
Indeed, sir. I mean, it was important for me to give him an opportunity to reconsider his instruction for me to cross him off.
Yeah.
I think that was the responsible thing to do, given that I was being asked to do something which was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but I had to act as envisaged in the undercover protocol, because to do otherwise would have risked exposure.
Yeah. And just so we understand, and perhaps I'll ask you a bit more about this later, what difference does it make whether in this instance, what difference did it make to anybody, Nathan Ring in particular, to simply say, this man's not eaten? Well, what skin off his nose was it to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing? What was the impact of all of this?
Well, I can't explain why managers were mistreated detainees, or, they should offer that explanation themselves. But the impact of not recording food and fluid refusal, you're potentially missing a deterioration in a detainee's mental health. It was used to identify whether detainees were protesting or on hunger strike. and of course it was an important part of monitoring their health. I mean, if a detainee is refusing to eat and there's no record of the food and fluid refusal, then the deterioration in health that comes as a consequence of that is going to go completely unnoticed, and so it can't be addressed by healthcare staff.
During the next shift, if another manager did exactly the same thing, then the next shift, yes, another manager did exactly the same thing, and a DCO complied in the way that you apparently had on this occasion, then nobody knows that man's not eating over 3 shifts.
Indeed, sir.
But I still come back to, what difference did it make to Nathan Ring to say, I'll cross him off rather than do the right thing? Or you cross him off rather than do the right thing? You see what my question is?
DCM Ring took pleasure in the suffering of detainees, and that's clear from the evidence that I have amassed and the evidence that I recorded whilst working at Brook House. So, I mean, I like you, I struggle to understand why someone would want to do that, but
Let's look at it.
He clearly got a kick out of it. I mean, yeah, you're right. What's in it for him other than the detainee wanted to make some form of protest by refusing to eat. He made that clear to me when he said he wasn't going to. Ring was intent in him not having his voice heard. That's the only conclusion I can draw from it, because why else would you care? Just say he hasn't eaten. It's not exactly going to create a shed load of work for you. He's not like he was on sustained hunger strike. It appeared to be the first time he had refused food.
I mean, unlike, for example, the instance you gave us yesterday when with the American chap who was outside the activities office or the library, and use of force was used on him, which you said was a matter of personal convenience at the end of a shift to those officers. Was there any inconvenience to Nathan Ring in this example?
Because I'm not a DC, because I wasn't a DCM, I don't know when DCMs would be required to kind of. If there's a food and fluid refusal, then maybe it's on DCMs to fill out ACDT forms and alert healthcare to the food and fluid refusal. So maybe there was maybe he didn't want to deal with the additional work that having to acknowledge a food and fluid refusal would cause. It's hard to tell if it just came out of pure apathy for the detainee or because he wanted to avoid personal inconveniences.
All right. Let's look at the next page in this transcript. At the top, Nathan Ring says, "This fucker here in the white T-shirt, grey jeans." Was this yet another detained man?
I think it's the same guy, actually.
Right. He's the one you say that said to me, he said he's not going to eat until he gets to do transfers.
Yes, it's the same guy, yes.
Ring, I said to him, how are you going to get transferred? You yesterday said we picked him up this morning. I want to make inquiries. I want to see the Home Office. You've been here a couple of days. They'll see you in the next couple of days if you want to see them. Then you have to apply. Then they will give you an appointment. And you say, yeah. You can't book an appointment, says Nathan Ring. Then somebody else says something inaudible. And you say, they're not going to know, are they, that he's not eating? Now, pausing there, what were you saying?
Well, I think what's important here, first of all, sir, is that if you look at bullet point 225, when there's the male officer inaudible, there's then a long pause of about 2 minutes in which we change location and we go into the B wing office, and we hand out some bats and have some conversations with some detainees.
Hand out some
table tennis bats.
Oh,
sorry.
Right.
And all I'm doing here really is just giving DCM Ring another opportunity to reconsider his instruction to me to cross the detainee's name off, because I was just checking, is this really what he wants me to do? I mean, and so I say to him again, they're not going to know, are they, that he's not eating?
Who's the they?
Healthcare, other officers who would need to be alert to food and fluid refusals on the wing.
And then you continue, there's something inaudible, and it reads on the transcript, and you'll make the point, and I know that we all know that you've made a statement pointing out certain corrections. Inevitably, these transcripts and the people who are transcribing them weren't there, and so there will be errors.
I appreciate it's
and
difficult.
we all appreciate that. But there's something inaudible here, keep knocking his name off, no one is going to know, something inaudible anyway. Were you making a statement there, or were you just commenting on what the reality of that meant?
It's me giving him another opportunity to appreciate what he's asking me to do.
Yeah.
You know, if a detainee's name is repeatedly knocked off, then the food and fluid refusal is going to go unrecorded. And I'm just reminding him of that.
And I take it you don't know now what the very first word that was missed was. Might it have been, for example, if you keep knocking his name off, something like that?
I don't think it was, to be honest. But if you listen to the tone in which it's said, it's hard to tell, of course, on the transcript. It's not an instruction. It's not, keep knocking his name off, because no one's going to know anyway.
No, well, that's really what I'm asking you, is it?
Keep knocking his name off. No one's going to know he hasn't eaten.
Yeah.
That's the tone in which it was said. It was a reminder to Ring that if we keep falsifying this document, no one will know that he's protesting.
And he says nobody will then care.
Yes, I do think that's a slight mistake. So I think he says, "Don't know, I don't care."
I don't know, I don't care.
I think so, but it's actually quite hard to tell on the footage as well. So I can see why this error has been made.
Right, let's go back then. I've asked the questions which we were asked to and agreed to ask you about that. Can we just then go back and fill in some other information, please? And I pick it up at paragraph 113 of your witness statement at page 26. And it's really about your work. You've told us already that you became an activities officer, that you worked a 13-hour shift, 8:15 according to the statement to 9:15 daily.
Yes, sir.
And was that an exceptional amount of hours, or was it the same shift every DCO did?
The activities DCOs did, their shifts were 30 minutes shorter. So, yes, 8:15 in the morning till 9:15 at night. The other officers would do 7:45 in the morning till 9:15 at night. So theirs were 13 and a half hours long, 30 minutes longer than ours.
Yeah, 4 days a week?
Yes. They also worked nights. Activities officers didn't work nights.
So you didn't work nights?
No, sir.
So, I mean, one of the problems, and this isn't a criticism of your filming, is unless you get any outside indicators or you see a clock on a wall, you don't know what time it is. And so sometimes we have to guess, or as I say, we pick it up from other material, but in some cases we may never know what the time was, but because of what you've just told us, we can always assume, in your case, it had to be between the hours of 8:15 and 9:15.
Yes, sir, that's right. I mean, what I would do most shifts would go into work slightly early and go to the gym, but I would get my radio in any case. So sometimes I would be asked over the radio to start my shift a bit early if there was short staffing or an incident occurred. So it's possible that on some shifts it's between sort of 7:30 in the morning and 9:15 at night.
Yeah, but we're talking about
But never in the evening.
Yeah, we're talking about daytime.
Never nighttime, sorry. Yes, sir.
And you say shifts were allocated across a set rota, which you believe covered 8 weeks.
I think so, sir, roughly.
And you say one shift in the rota would finish at 6:15 in the evening.
Yes, sir.
Why would that be?
Because we were activities staff and our shifts started sort of half an hour later than everyone else's. Occasionally we would have to make up for those 30 minutes that we had off every morning, essentially. So I think that hate shift was just a sort of an additional shift to make sure we made up. We were doing the same hours as all the other DCOs.
Yeah. Now, one of the questions you've been asked to consider is the G4s Management Structure, and there's a subheading in your statement that begins at paragraph 115. The Centre Director, who was that at the time?
Ben Saunders, sir.
And did you have any personal dealings with him?
Barely, sir. Barely saw him.
Did you see him during your training, for example?
He did an introductory talk on our training.
Yeah.
Yes. But apart from that,
Yeah.
very little, sir.
So he was the centre director,
Yes, sir.
except I think you note in the statement for a period in 2016 when he was at Medway.
Yes, in the aftermath of the Panorama programme into Medway, I think G4s sacked or he resigned the centre director at Medway,
Yeah.
and so Ben Saunders was sent to Medway to oversee the centre, whilst
Yeah.
G4s found a new boss for the centre, I think.
And who was his deputy, certainly during the period we're interested in?
Steve Skitt, sir.
And did you have much to do with him, or he with you?
Very little, sir. He was investigating at one point a female member of staff who worked for Aramark, which was the catering company at Brook House.
Yeah.
He suspected her of smuggling drugs in for detainees, and he asked me if I had any knowledge about this because she was seen in the library at some point.
Yeah.
During which, on a shift in which I was working,
Yeah.
and he wondered if there may have been a drug pass of some sort in the library, and whether I had seen the drug pass or had any knowledge of it.
Well, as you mentioned it. We have, I think, it's your diary for that event. Should be B11. A11. And that's for the first time, I think, so we can look at least one example. We'll look at some others of your contemporaneous diaries. And can we have up on screen, please, Chair, it's, check if it's A or B, it's A11 for you. BBC 000066. No, wrong one. It's a document, BBC 000066. Right, here's a diary of yours, and we can see it's dated at the top, 1st of April 2017. And it begins reporting shift 31st of March 2017. This morning I was in the library, this afternoon a sports officer, and this evening in the IT room. Yeah? This one goes on for 48 pages, but it's page 8 I would like to ask you to look at. And from time to time, Mr. Tully, you're going to have to decipher your own handwriting, which is rich coming from me because I've got appalling handwriting.
Yes, apologies.
Page 8, please. You having problems? Are we back to good old Wi-Fi, or is there something else? Do you want to shut it down and try opening it again, perhaps? I mean the document, not your system. It's Wi-Fi. Okay. Transcript. Maybe you can do it this way. You carry on, see if you can get, if you wouldn't mind. Mr. Tully, to your right, you'll see some hard copy bundles. And if you find volume 1, and it might be easier, I think, in future, Chair, if I'm going to ask for a box to come in here so that Mr. Tully can pick them out rather than, because one of them's going to slide off that table.
Yeah.
But if you've got volume 1, and go behind tab 11 in volume 1.
The tabs only go up to 8, sir.
Right, you got the wrong volume then.
Got volume 1.
And there should be volume 1 of 3, tabs 1 to A13. I don't know if we've got an usher here who can help.
It might be this one to your right.
Yeah.
On top, if you look at the. Does that?
Volume 2 of 3.
Okay,
No, it
not
should
that
be
one.
volume 1 of 3.
The one to your left,
three
perhaps
of
in front
three.
of the screen.
Right, we've got 8 up on, well done. We've got it up on screen. No, we'll sort out the bundles later, don't worry, put that back.
Okay.
Right, 6th of April, 2017. Today I did ACO duties in internal visits for the whole shift.
Yes, sir.
Now, why were you doing ACO duties?
I guess they were short of ACOs.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to
But
try
this
and...
could have been... yeah, no, it must have been. I mean, there was a time in which I was off work for 6 weeks with stress, and then I came back on a phased return and was put on ACO duties, but I don't think this is around that
Well,
time.
tell us about that. I don't think we've heard about that before. When were you off with stress?
Some time in which I was in correspondence with the BBC but not working for them.
Right. So before the 6th of March,
Yes.
after the 12th of January the year before,
Yes, I think around September 2016.
and what was the stress caused by? I mean, if it's got nothing to do with this, I don't want to know, but if it has anything to do with your evidence, tell us.
There was a Ghanaian detainee who I found hanging from the landing on, I think it was D-Wing.
Mm.
And so we cut him down, staff and detainees supported his body, staff cut the ligature from around his neck, pulled him up onto the landing, and having witnessed the suicide attempt, I then had to go on a escort with him to hospital, and I just struggled with having seen it. I was struggling, and went to the doctor to talk to her about it, and she signed me off with stress-related disorder for 6 weeks.
All right,
And then I returned on phased return, but I did ACO duties for a couple of those weeks.
I see. So that could explain why you were on ACO duties on this day.
It may do, but actually I think it was more around September time, 2016. So I think perhaps they were just short-staffed on this shift.
All right.
It's hard to tell without looking at the previous notes from previous days, but that will tell us.
All right. Well, let me read the note, and you correct me if I'm wrong about anything. At 15:30, I attended an interview with Steve Skitt, the Deputy Director of Brook House. He interviewed me about a time when, and you name someone there. Is that right? I don't
Yes.
name her, but you name a woman.
Indeed.
Entered the library in which I was working in early February,
Yes, sir.
and took a bag from behind the counter of the library where I was sitting.
Yes, sir.
It happened quickly while I was preoccupied with work. She didn't really say hello. I apologised to Steve and said I couldn't see what was in the bag.
Yes, sir.
I explained that, and these two words I've struggled to read.
I explained that staff corruption never crossed my mind
Right.
with Leah because she seemed kind and honest.
And I didn't believe it was in her to put her colleagues at such risk. Steve understood this and said that I personally was in no way being investigated. He asked if I might be able to give any information that might help them with their investigation. I explained to Steve that the question was respectful. Is that what it says? Next page.
I can't
Sorry,
see
it's
the
next page.
sorry.
That's because we've gone over to the next page. Was respectful?
The question was unexpected, I think.
Unexpected, sorry. I thought the interview would be about the something incident, self-harm
About the
incident.
self-harm incident, I was first at the scene too, following...
Incorrect information being given to a detainee regarding removal or
yes,
transfer.
Yes, yes.
But I didn't have a good relationship with Leah. So if given some time to reflect on her behaviour and relationships with detainees, I may be able to give them a hand with their investigation.
Steve liked this comment and said he understood that it was difficult to respond to the question when suddenly thrown at me. He thanked me and said we could have an interview at a later date after I had reflected.
Okay. So that's really what you were telling us about, that particular incident.
Yes, sir.
Regarding suspicions, and that was the only interaction you'd had with Mr. Skip, was it? Or one that you can recall well?
Yes, sir. Yes. I think it's the only one, to be honest. Other
Now,
than saying
you
hello.
Yeah. Now, you say that they, presumably in your statement at 116, you say that they were supported by a team of senior managers who you refer to as the Senior Management Team, or the SMT,
Yes, sir.
and you believe that there were around 6 managers at that level with specific areas of responsibility for the wing, security and so on,
I'd say at least 6, sir, yes.
and the SMT member with responsibility for activities in the period April to July of 2017 was somebody you named to us yesterday, Jules
Jules Williams, sir.
Williams,
Yes, sir.
who you'd speak to once or twice a week. Was that a man or a woman?
A man, sorry.
And so you've got Ben Saunders, Centre Director, during the relevant period, Steve Skip below him, Deputy Director.
Yes, sir.
You've got the SMT.
Yes, sir.
Is Mr. Saunders and Mr. Skit, are they members of the SMT, or does the SMT sit below them?
They sit below them as far as I was aware.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps, yes, they kind of headed up the SMT, I suppose.
Yeah. And you say beneath the SMT were the DCMs, the managers.
Yes, sir.
And unlike Ben Saunders, Steve Skit and the rest of the SMT, which rather suggests that Ben Saunders and Mr. Skit, at least when you wrote this statement, you considered as part of the senior management team, which probably makes sense.
Yes.
They wore suits,
Yes, sir.
but the DCMs, and this is important when we look at the footage, because the DCMs wore a white G4s shirt with a red G4s tie.
Yes, sir.
So if we're looking at the footage, any time we see a person wearing a G4s white shirt with a tie, that is a manager.
Yes, sir.
They managed, you say in this statement, the DCOs directly. They had specific areas of responsibility, which you've already told us in passing. They'd be, for example, responsible for overseeing wings. And there would be another DCM responsible for overseeing detainee reception.
Yes, sir.
One for overseeing visits, who would support and manage the DCOs working in the visits hall and the visits corridor, and remind us so that we understand. You mentioned the visits area yesterday, and do you remember, if needs be, we can bring up the image again, or the images. But do you remember at the top right of the image was a little single-storey building
Yes.
in isolation? Is that where visitors presented themselves?
That's where visitors presented themselves, yes, sir.
And where was the visits hall?
But the visits hall was on the main, the second building, the main building.
When you say the main building, not the residential part, but the gatehouse
No,
area?
no, the residential part.
It was in the
Yes,
residential.
but it was an area which was only accessible to detainees who had a visitors appointment.
Right.
So visitors would check in at the visit centre, that small building at the top right of the image we were looking at yesterday. They'd be checked in by ACOs. They'd be escorted by they'd be searched and escorted by ACOs through the first building where the gatehouse is and the sat desk is. They'd then go through a sterile area, which was kind of like just an outside area between the first and second building.
Yeah.
They'd then they'd pass through a number of electronic and lock and key doors whilst doing this, and then they'd be taken up to the visits corridor on the first floor of the second building where detainees would reside.
Yeah.
This is all in areas out of bounds to detainees.
Yeah.
They'd be checked in for their visit. They'd enter the hall from the visits corridor, and the detainees would enter the hall from another door,
I see.
which they did have access to if they were granted a visit.
Thank you. And we're just going through the different DCM responsibilities, and then there was the DCM who managed activities, and you've mentioned Ramon Giraldo already.
Yes, sir.
DCO uniforms, they were different, were they?
Yes, sir.
What did the DCOs wear?
There were navy polos, navy G4s polos with
Polo shirts, short-sleeved or long-sleeved?
short-sleeved.
Yeah.
You'd wear a navy G4s trousers. You'd be issued with a G4s cardigan, a G4s jacket. It was all navy for DCOs.
Yeah. So, were they combat trousers, or was there a choice of what you could wear?
The trousers issued to you by G4S were just cotton G4S trousers. Some staff chose to wear their own combat trousers.
Yeah. Fish knife,
Fish knife was issued to us, yes, sir.
keychain, belt, radio pouch, and key pouch. I'm just reading from your statement.
Yes, sir.
And ACOs were all the same as DCOs.
Yes, sir,
So you
but they
can't
weren't,
distinguish between them.
they weren't issued with a fish knife. That would be the only thing.
Right. Handy. We've heard about Oscars, Oscar 1 and 2. Tell us about them.
So,
We haven't heard yet, but
to the best of my
We've certainly seen
recollection, an
reference.
Oscar was a DCM, but Oscar 1 was kind of the... If you were allocated as Oscar 1 on any given shift, you were kind of the most senior DCM. You would
Yeah.
respond to instances of self-harm or first responses. I think, you had the most control before the senior management team.
yeah.
I think you may have been responsible for deciding which staff were posted where.
So you were perhaps regarded as the more senior DCM on duty on that shift.
Yes, the guy in charge.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly on a weekend, the Oscar 1 was of significant importance because the SMT weren't around on weekends. Maybe one member of the SMT might have been. So the Oscar 1 would be
Yeah.
sort of running the show.
And who was the Oscar 2?
I'm not sure if it was Oscar 1 second in command or not, actually. I don't know if they had different areas of responsibility. I can't quite remember.
Or did Oscar 2 have anything to do with detainee reception, perhaps? Or do you not know?
Perhaps, but I'm not quite
All
sure,
right,
sir.
we'll find out another way.
Sorry.
All right. Although we've had an extended break, I see the time, and I think the chair wants to ask you a few questions before we break for lunch.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. My apologies, they're not all necessarily connected. It's just to pick up on a couple of things from earlier as well.
Problem, Chair.
You've referred to, in this conversation just now with the questions that Mr. Altman was asking about the SMT, were there any groups of staff or individual staffs that sat between those senior managers who generally wore their own clothes rather than G4S uniforms, and then DCOs and DCMs? Was there any kind of middle management between those two groups?
Between
Between the SMT and then the DCOs and DCMs?
No, Chair. There was nothing between them.
Okay, thank you. You've also referenced a short space of time where you worked at Tinsley House.
Yes, Chair.
Do you have any observations about a comparison between Tinsley House and Brook House in terms of overall culture difference?
Tinsley House was a much more humane and appropriate environment in which to detain someone, I felt. It was... detainees weren't locked in cells. They had rooms which they could leave whenever they wanted. There was more space. Among staff, there was a much less toxic atmosphere. Detainees could move around more freely. There was more staff to more detainees. It was just a nicer facility, which didn't resemble a prison. Certainly not a Category B prison. Perhaps Category D, although I'm not an expert on that. I mean, still, that detainees there were being detained indefinitely, so that would have remained an issue. But in terms of the conditions in which they were detained, it was a much more humane environment.
And are you aware if there were the same staff working on the two different sites, Tinsley and Brook House?
There was different staff for Tinsley and different staff for Brook House. Very occasionally there would be crossover. I remember when there were sort of when Brook House was kind of, there was a time of real short staffing, and the new beds had been added to the ground floors of B, C and D wing, A, C and D wing. And there was, as was often the case, not enough staff to cater to the needs of detainees, so I think some Tinsley staff were sort of shipped in to help. I think Tinsley staff also underwent some refurbishment as well, and so there was a time in which Tinsley staff were at Brook House, but on the whole, you mainly had Brook House staff and Tinsley House staff,
Okay,
generally.
And then my final question, you mentioned that you were one of the first people who responded to an incident of what sounds like fairly serious self-harm.
Yes, Chair.
Do you remember whether there was any debrief of any sort conducted after that incident, either termed a hot debrief, which would have happened very quickly after the incident, or a cold debrief some days or weeks following the incident?
Not that I can remember, Chair, I'm sorry.
Okay, and do you remember ever having a debrief for any other adverse incident, whether that was a use of force or a self-harm incident?
Debriefs did take place. I can't remember them. I can't remember any, but I don't doubt that they did happen, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, Chair. Well, we're a little off 1 o'clock, but perhaps that's a good time because I'm coming to a new topic. So can I suggest, Chair, if you agree, that we return at 2 o'clock?
Thank you very much. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
All rise.